The working man came home from the pit, the mill, or the dockside with one word on his lips: tea. Not the drink, but the hot meal waiting under a plate on the kitchen table, the reward for a body wrung out by a 12-hour shift. These were the dishes that fed Britain's labourers when meat was dear and every penny was counted twice. Strange cuts, briny shellfish, and steaming bowls that turned scraps into supper. Most have vanished entirely, too humble, too pungent, or simply too much bother for the modern kitchen. We are counting down 25 British working man's teas no one makes anymore, each a forgotten taste of grit and thrift. Let us begin with number 25. Number 25, bloaters on toast. Bloaters arrived wrapped in newspaper from the fishmonger's slab, a whole herring cured in salt and cold smoked until its skin turned a dull bronze. Working men split them down the back, laid them under the grill, and ate them steaming on thick toast with a scrape of butter. The smell was ferocious, oily and smoky enough to cling to the curtains for a day. In the 1950s, a pair of Yarmouth bloaters cost barely 4p, making them a cheap and filling tea for a man with a hard morning behind him and another shift ahead. Children learned to pick the fine bones from between their teeth without thinking. Yet the bloater could not survive the rise of the boneless, odorless fish finger. Supermarkets wanted fillets in tidy plastic, not whole smoked herring that stank out the chiller. Today the bloater is a curiosity, remembered by few and made by almost none. Number 24. Cockles and whelks. Saturday tea on the coast often came in a paper bag, slick with vinegar and dusted with white pepper. Cockles, whelks, mussels, and winkles were sold by the pint from barrows and seafront stalls, scooped warm and eaten with a pin to tease the winkles from their shells. For a working family near the sea, the shore was a free larder, and a bag of cockles cost only a few pence to fill a plate. The briny, rubbery flesh was an acquired pleasure, washed down with strong tea or a glass of stout. Men who had worked the docks all week swore by them, and children dared each other over the curl of the whelk. Yet as refrigerated lorries and supermarket counters spread, the seafront stalls thinned out. The skill of cooking shellfish at home faded, and the bag of cockles became a holiday novelty rather than a weekly tea. Number 23. Polony. Few sights said tea time quite like a fat coil of Polony glistening on the butcher's counter under its bright red skin. This finely minced pork sausage, cooked and ready to eat, was sliced cold onto bread or fried in rounds until the edges curled and crisped. A quarter pound cost only a few pence, and a single length could feed a family with bread and pickle on the side. The texture was smooth, almost springy, and the flavour mild enough that even fussy children cleared their plates. Polony turned up in lunch tins and on tea tables across the industrial towns, a reliable filler when the wage had to stretch to Friday. Yet the bright red sausage struggled against the wave of sliced ham and processed meats sealed in plastic. As the old pork butchers closed, Polony slipped quietly off the counter, surviving now only in a handful of traditional shops. Number 22. Beef tea. When a man came home grey with cold and bone-tired, his wife reached for the beef tea. Sometimes it was a spoonful of bovril stirred into boiling water. Sometimes a proper broth simmered for hours from a shin bone and a handful of trimmings, strained until it ran clear and amber. Poured into a cup or over torn bread, it warmed a body from the inside before the real tea arrived. Beef tea was the drink of the sick room and the night shift alike, sold to mothers as nourishment in a cup when meat itself was beyond the budget. A jar of bovril cost a shilling and lasted weeks, its salty, meaty punch standing in for a stew nobody could afford. Yet as wages rose and proper meals became routine, the ritual of beef tea faded. Few today would think to drink their dinner, and the steaming cup has all but disappeared. Number 21. Bread and milk. Known as pobs, sops, or simply bread and milk, this was the gentlest tea of all, and often the only one a poor household could manage. Stale bread was torn into a bowl, scalded with hot milk, and sweetened with a spoon of sugar, or a drizzle of treacle if the tin allowed. It cost next to nothing, used up the heel of the loaf, and slipped down easily for the very young, the very old, and the toothless. Mothers made it for sick children, and for husbands who had lost their teeth to a hard life and harder dentistry. The warm, sweet sludge was comfort itself on a cold night, asking nothing of the cook but a kettle and yesterday's bread. As bread grew cheap and puddings plentiful, pobs came to seem like a relic of want. Today it survives only in the memories of those who grew up with little. Number 20. Sheep's head broth. Nothing tested a family's thrift like a sheep's head, bought from the butcher for pennies and carried home wrapped in paper, sometimes still with its wool-flecked ears. The housewife scrubbed it, split it, and simmered it for hours with barley, onions, and whatever roots were to hand until the meat fell away and the broth turned rich and gluey. The brains were prized, the tongue shared out, and the cheeks were the sweetest morsel of all. A single head could feed a large family for 2 days, the broth stretched with bread, and the leftovers turned into a second pot. It was not a meal for the squeamish, and the sight of the head in the pot frightened more than one child. Yet as butchers stopped selling such cuts and stomachs grew weaker, the sheep's head vanished from the table, taking its frugal genius with it. Number 19. Cow heel stew. The cow heel was the cheapest thing in the butcher's window, a knuckle of foot and gristle that looked like nothing at all. But the housewife knew its secret. Simmered for hours with onions and a little stewing steak, it released its gelatine until the liquor turned thick and unctuous, coating the lips and setting to jelly when cold. Cow heel stew was the broth that built strong men, sold to mothers as good for the blood and the bones. In the mill towns, a pair of heels cost only a few pence, and the rich, savory gravy stretched across a whole loaf. Some bakers even sold cow heel pies, the meat falling soft inside a sturdy crust. Yet the long cooking and the unlovely appearance doomed it once convenience took hold. As the pots came off the range, cow heel retreated to a few northern shops and the recipe books of the old guard. Number 18. Sprats fried whole. A bag of sprats was about the cheapest fish a man could buy. Tiny silver herrings sold by the pound for a copper or two from the slab. The housewife tossed them in seasoned flour and fried them whole in dripping until they were crisp and golden, head, tail, bones, and all. Eaten with the fingers and a wedge of bread, a plateful made a filling tea that cost almost nothing. The smell of frying sprats filled the back kitchens of every coastal and dockside town, and children crunched through them like crisps. They were oily, salty, and full of goodness, a working man's feast pulled straight from the harbor. Yet as tastes turned to neat fillets and the fishmongers closed, the humble sprat fell from favor. Few would now eat a fish whole, bones and all, and the crackle of frying sprats has all but gone silent. Number 17. Pikelets with dripping. Before the toaster ruled the kitchen, tea often meant pikelets, those thin, holy cousins of the crumpet, cooked on a griddle and slathered while still hot. The working man liked his spread not with butter, which cost money, but with beef dripping lifted from the jar by the stove, salted and spread thick so it melted into every hole. A plate of pikelets and a pot of strong tea was a tea in itself, cheap, hot, and ready in minutes. The griddle hissed, the kitchen smelled of warm batter, and the dripping carried the ghost of last Sunday's roast. Bakers sold them by the half-dozen for a few pence, and many housewives made their own from flour, yeast, and a hot plate. Yet as packaged crumpets and sliced bread took over, the homemade pikelet faded, and dripping became something to throw away rather than treasure. Number 16. Kippers. The kipper was the smell of a working man's tea across the north. A herring split, salted, and oak smoked until it turned a deep mahogany. Grilled, or more often jugged in a tall jug of boiling water that left the kitchen reeking gloriously for hours, it was eaten with brown bread and a knife that smelled of fish for the rest of the week. A pair of Craster or Manx kippers cost a few pence and gave a man a proper savory feed for next to nothing. Picking the bones was a ritual, and the oily, smoky flesh was thought to be the very thing for strength. Kippers turned up at breakfast and at tea alike in the terraces and the fishing towns. Yet the strong smell, the bones, and the rise of bland, dyed fillets pushed the real kipper aside, and today few will tolerate it stinking out the house. Number 15. Mock turtle soup. Real turtle soup was a dish for gentlemen's clubs, but the working classes had their own clever answer. Mock turtle soup was made from a calf's head, simmered for hours with herbs and a splash of sherry if the house ran to it, until the gelatinous meat mimicked the prized turtle of the rich. It was a triumph of imitation, a poor family's way of laying claim to a luxury they would never taste. The calf's head cost little at the butcher, and the soup stretched far, served thick and brown with bread to mop the bowl. Tinned versions even reached the grocer's shelf for a time, a nod to how popular the trick had become. Yet as calves' heads vanished from the counter and tastes turned squeamish, mock turtle soup slipped away entirely. Today it survives only as a curious name in old cookery books, its clever deception forgotten. Number 14. Pilchards on toast. When the wage was almost gone and tea still had to appear, the tin of pilchards in tomato sauce was a household savior. The fat, oily fish were tipped onto hot buttered toast, mashed down into the soft bread, and eaten while the sauce soaked through. A tin cost only a few pence and sat in the cupboard for months, insurance against a lean Thursday. The flavor was strong and unmistakable, the bones soft enough to eat, the goodness undeniable. Children either loved them or fled the kitchen, and many a working man called pilchards on toast his favorite quick tea after a late shift. Cornish boats once landed pilchards by the ton, feeding the nation cheaply. Yet as fresh fish grew affordable and tastes refined, the humble tin lost its place. Pilchards were quietly rebranded as sardines, and the old tea of fish mashed onto toast slipped from memory. Number 13. Spam fritters. Spam arrived with the war and stayed for decades, the tinned pink loaf that became a working family's standby. The fritter was its finest hour. Thick slices were dipped in a simple batter and fried in dripping until golden and puffed, the salty meat softening inside its crisp jacket. Served with chips, beans, or a mound of mash, spam fritters made a cheerful, filling tea on a tight budget, and a single tin stretched to feed the whole family. The smell of frying batter promised something hot and satisfying after a long day. For a generation raised on rationing, spam was not a joke, but a reliable friend, and the fritter turned a humble tin into a treat. Yet as fresh meat became routine and spam became a punchline, the fritter slid off the menu. A dish that once meant a good tea now raises only a knowing smirk. Number 12. Elder. Few teas have vanished as completely as elder, the boiled and pressed udder of a cow, once a staple on the butcher's slab in Lancashire and the Black Country. Sold ready-cooked, pale and faintly marbled, it was sliced thin and eaten cold with bread and vinegar, or fried in a pan until the edges browned. A few pennies bought enough to fill a man after a shift, and to those raised on it, the mild, faintly milky flavour was a genuine treat. Tripe shops kept it alongside the cow heel and the trotters, and queues formed for a good fresh batch. Yet elder asked for skills and a stomach that the modern shopper no longer had. As the tripe dressers closed their doors, and the very idea of eating an udder turned faces pale, elder disappeared almost without trace. Today most Britons have never heard its name, let alone tasted it. Number 11. Lobby. In Stoke-on-Trent they called it lobby, in Liverpool scouse, a thin, slow stew that fed the potteries and the docks alike on the cheapest of ingredients. A little stewing meat, sometimes none at all on the leanest weeks, was eked out with potatoes, onions, carrots and barley, simmered all day on the range until it collapsed into a thick, comforting mush. The poorest version, made without meat, was known plainly as blind scouse, and nobody was ashamed of it. A pot cost pennies and fed a houseful, topped up day after day until payday came round. Workers came home from the pits and the pot banks to a bowl of lobby and a hunk of bread, and asked for nothing more. Yet as wages rose and ready meals filled the freezers, the all-day stew fell from daily life. Lobby survives now as local pride, but rarely as the everyday tea it once was. Number 10. Jellied eels. Nothing was more East End than a bowl of jellied eels, the dish that fed working London for generations. Live eels from the Thames and beyond were chopped, boiled with herbs and vinegar, and left to set in their own savory jelly, eaten cold from the pie and mash shops or carried home in a basin. A bowl cost only a few pence, and the soft, gelatinous flesh was prized by dockers, costermongers and market traders who knew good cheap food when they found it. The eel was plentiful, the jelly nourishing, and the whole thing was as much a ritual as a meal. Stalls and shops dotted every working district, their marble counters slick with liquor. Yet as eel numbers dwindled and younger tastes recoiled from the cold, wobbling jelly, the shops closed one by one. Today, jellied eels are a dwindling tradition, beloved by the old and bewildering to the young. Number 9. Potted shrimps. On the northwest coast, tea often meant a pat of potted shrimps. The tiny brown shrimps of Morecambe Bay, boiled, peeled and sealed in a pot under a layer of spiced butter. Spread on hot toast, the butter melted to release a wave of mace and nutmeg and the sweet, delicate shrimp beneath. Once they were cheap and everyday, scooped from the bay by the cartload and sold for coppers to feed the fishing families and the mill workers inland. The potting kept them for days without a fridge, a clever answer to a perishable catch. The flavour was rich and faintly luxurious, yet it cost a working family almost nothing. As the shrimp beds thinned and the picking work dried up, potted shrimps grew scarce and dear. Today they survive as a delicacy on restaurant menus, a far cry from the humble tea they once were. Number 8. Saveloy and peas pudding. In the northeast, the cry Saveloy dip meant tea was sorted. A bright red Saveloy sausage was served in a soft bun, spread thick with peas pudding, that smooth golden paste of split peas boiled down with a ham bone, then dipped in the meaty stock until it dripped. For a few pence a man could buy a feed that was hot, salty, and deeply satisfying after a shift on the docks or down the pit. Peas pudding alone, served with bacon or stuffed into bread, was a tea in its own right across Tyneside and Durham. The shops kept their peas pudding warm in great pots, ladling it out by the spoonful. Yet as the old sausage shops closed and tastes turned to burgers and pizza, the Savoy dip became a regional rarity. Outside the northeast, few have ever tasted this proper working man's tea. Number 7. Welsh rarebit. Long before cheese on toast came in a packet, the working man's tea was a proper Welsh rarebit, and there was an art to it. Grated cheese was melted slowly with a knob of butter, a splash of ale or milk, a spoon of mustard, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce until it turned to a thick, savory cream, then poured over toast and browned under the grill. The result was sharp, glossy, and far richer than the bland slice of melted cheese that replaced it. A heel of cheese and a crust of bread cost little, yet rarebit felt like a treat, the kind of tea a tired man looked forward to. Some added a beaten egg, some a splash of stout. Yet as convenience took over and cheese on toast became a careless afterthought, the proper rarebit faded. The recipe survives, but the patience to make it rarely does. Number 6. Lardy cake. Tea was not all savory, and for the working man with a sweet tooth there was lardy cake, the gloriously unhealthy treat of the southern counties. Bread dough was rolled and folded with lard, sugar, and dried fruit, then baked until the bottom turned to a sticky, caramelized slab that clung to the tin. Sold cheap by the bakers on a Saturday, a wedge of lardy cake was a reward at the end of a hard week, eaten warm with a cup of strong tea. It was dense, rich, and unapologetically greasy, made from the cheapest fats a household could find. Every region had its version, from Wiltshire to the Cotswolds, each baker guarding their fold. Yet as health worries grew and supermarket cakes took over the shelf, the lardy cake became an indulgence few would admit to. Today it lingers only in old-fashioned bakeries and fond memory. Number 5. Pig's trotters. The pig's trotter was the working man's reward, bought for pennies and boiled for hours until the meat turned soft and the skin to sticky gelatine. Eaten hot with a shake of vinegar, or cold and set in its own jelly. A trotter was sucked clean from the bone with relish, a messy, fingers-only feast that demanded a good appetite. Pubs once kept jars of pickled trotters on the bar, a savory bite to go with a pint after the shift. Mothers stretched a pair of trotters into broth for the children, wasting not a scrap. The rich, porky flavor and the satisfying gnaw made it a tea men dreamed of underground. Yet the labor, the bones, and the unfamiliar look doomed the trotter once convenience arrived. Today it appears only in specialist shops and the kitchens of those who still remember a Britain where every part of the pig found a plate. Number 4. Tripe and onions. No tea divided the British table like tripe and onions. The pale, honeycombed lining of a cow's stomach, simmered gently in milk with onions until tender. Bought ready-dressed from the tripe shop for a few pence, it was a staple of the industrial north, cheap, light, and easy on a weak stomach. The smell was faint but distinctive, the texture soft and slippery, and to those raised on it, the mild, milky dish was the very taste of home. Tripe dressers lined the high streets of every mill town, their windows stacked with the pale, dripping slabs. Fathers swore by it, children fled from it, and mothers cooked it because it was kind to the purse. Yet as the dressers closed, and the very thought of stomach lining turned the modern shopper's face, tripe collapsed almost overnight. Once eaten by millions, it is now a near-forgotten relic of working Britain. Number 3. Bread and dripping. Of all the working man's teas, none was starker or more telling than bread and dripping. Every drop of fat from the Sunday joint was saved, strained, and cooled in a jar by the stove. The rich brown jelly at the bottom, prized above the pale fat on top. Spread thick on a doorstep of bread with a good pinch of salt, it was supper on the leanest nights, carrying the ghost of last week's roast long after the meat was gone. It cost nothing but the bread, and for many children it was simply what tea was. The dripping was savory, salty, and far more satisfying than it had any right to be. A small miracle of thrift. Yet as health campaigns turned against animal fat and butter grew affordable, the dripping jar was emptied into the bin. Today, bread and dripping survives only as a memory of how little a family once needed. Number 2. Liver and onions. Few teas were as common or as fiercely divisive as liver and onions. Slices of cheap lamb or pig's liver were fried fast and hot, smothered in soft, sweet onions, and served with mash and a flood of thick gravy. The trick was speed, for a moment too long in the pan turned the liver tough and bitter, and every housewife guarded her timing. Liver cost a fraction of a proper joint, yet was packed with iron, so mothers insisted on clean plates whatever the wrinkled noses around the table. The metallic smell filled the terrace kitchens once or twice a week without fail. Fathers home from the shift ate it gratefully, knowing it kept the family strong on next to nothing. Yet as fresh offal vanished from the supermarket chiller and tastes turned away, liver and onions faded from the weekly menu, surviving now as a nostalgic taste of harder, leaner days. And finally, number 1. Faggots. Peas and gravy. At the very top sits the dish that meant tea was a celebration. Made from the cheapest scraps of the pig, the liver, heart, and belly. Minced with breadcrumbs, onion, and sage, wrapped in a lace of caul fat, and baked until rich and dark. Smothered in thick onion gravy and crowded with mushy peas, a plate of faggots was a feast conjured from offcuts, the proudest of all the working man's teas. In the Black Country and the Midlands, faggot shops did a roaring trade, their windows fogged and their counters crowded with men carrying basins home for the family. A few pence bought a tea that filled and satisfied as no fancy cut could. The flavor was deep, herby, and unmistakable. The smell of it cooking, the very smell of home. Yet as the proper butchers closed and shrink-wrapped imitations took over, the real faggot grew scarce. A handful of shops keep the tradition alive, but the everyday tea that once crowned working tables, dark, savory, and made with love from what others threw away, has almost entirely vanished. Faggots were more than a meal. They were the proof that a working family could take the humblest scraps and turn them into something worth coming home to. That's our countdown of 25 British working man's teas no one makes anymore. Which one did your dad or your granddad swear by? Was it tripe or faggots and peas? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten tastes of old Britain.